Welcome to the Meal Pattern Success webinar on the CACFP Adult Meal Pattern. My name is Shirley Wu and I will be presenting the webinar today. We will go over the meal pattern chart for the adult meal pattern and point out a few differences in this meal pattern. We will take a look at the offer versus serve option for adults, then move into some common special dietary need issues that affect our senior populations, and look at options for cultural meals. Let's look at our meal pattern chart today. This chart is available on the CACFP meal pattern and menu planning page and details out what you would need to serve your participants at meals or snacks. We have a meal pattern for breakfast, lunch, or supper, and snack. For breakfast, you need to serve a fluid milk, vegetable or fruit, and a grain. For lunch or supper, you have to serve all 5 food components. This includes fluid milk, vegetables, fruits, grains, and a meat or meat alternate. For snack, you can choose any 2 out of the 5 food components. With the adult meal pattern, there's a few flexibilities since we know that many adult participants are either lactose intolerant or minimal milk drinkers. While fluid milk is required at breakfast and lunch and is an option for snack, adult daycare sponsors can choose to make the fluid milk component optional for supper meals. This means that a supper that includes grains, a meat, a fruit, a vegetable, but no fluid milk would still be a reimbursable meal. In addition, it is also allowable to substitute yogurt for the fluid milk component at one meal each day. So if you serve breakfast and you wanted to substitute 6 ounces of yogurt for 8 ounces of fluid milk, that would be a reimbursable meal. This is only allowable in the adult meal pattern. Moving on to grains. Grains have several requirements. The first is that whole grain rich grains must be served at one meal or snack each day. This means that if multiple grains are offered for the meal or snack, all grains served must be whole grain rich. Whole grain rich is defined in more detail in our grains webinar, which is available in our meal pattern video series. Briefly though, a whole grain rich item is a grain item that contains at least 50% whole grains, and the rest of the grains are creditable. All grains served, however, must be creditable. When we say creditable grains, we're talking about grains that have a minimum amount of nutrients from either the bran and germ of the grain or from added vitamins and minerals. Creditable grains include either enriched grains, whole grains, or bran or germ. If you are not sure whether your grains are considered whole grain rich or creditable, you can use the flowchart for creditable and whole grain rich grains that's available on the CACFP meal pattern and menu planning webpage, or refer to our grains basics video. For the adult meal pattern, the serving size for grains will include at least 2 slices or 2 servings for breakfast, lunch, and supper, and 1 slice or serving for snack. There are a few additional rules for the grains component. Grain-based desserts are not allowed. This is to reduce the amount of sugar consumed by participants. On a similar note, breakfast cereals must not contain more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. We have resources on our CACFP meal pattern and menu planning page that will help you figure out if your grains are meeting these requirements. These include the Sugar Limit Wallet Card and Exhibit A. Starting October 1st, 2021, measurements will be moving to a more precise system called ounce equivalents. Ounce equivalents is used in the meat and meat alternate component already. For more information, refer to the CACFP meal pattern video on ounce equivalents for grains. When we talk about the meat component, we are only including the lean parts of the meat, not the fat or the skin or bones. This means that you have to be careful only to credit the lean meat. Meats can include any animal product that is USDA inspected. If you would like to serve meat alternates instead, There is also a number of options, including tofu, soy and alternate protein products, cheese, eggs, cooked beans and peas, nuts and seed butters, yogurt, and whole nut and seeds. Meat and meat alternates are required at lunch or supper and can be substituted for the grains component at breakfast up to 3 times a week. Meat and meat alternates are not required at snack, but can be one of 2 components that is served. When substituting meats for grains at breakfast, serve 2 ounces for the full portion. Lunch and supper will also require 2 ounces for a full portion. For snack, only 1 ounce is required. When it comes to meat alternates, there's a few areas to be careful about. If you serve tofu, make sure it meets the protein requirements of 5 grams of protein per 2.2 ounces, and the tofu must be recognizable, meaning it can't be blended into other foods. If you serve yogurt, including soy yogurt, make sure it is within the sugar limit requirements of having less than 23 grams of sugar per 6 ounces. If you do end up serving yogurt, make sure it is not being used to meet both the fluid milk and the meat alternate requirement at the same meal. Moving on to fruits. Same as the child meal pattern, fruits can include any fruits, including dried fruits. If you do serve dried fruits, be aware that the dried fruit can credit for twice the volume. So a 1/4 cup of raisins can credit for a 1/2 cup of fruits. When serving fruit juice, make sure that it is 100% fruit juice and it only counts towards reimbursable meals once a day. While juices can contain a lot of vitamins and minerals, it lacks many of the same fiber that helps with regularity and satiety, and so is not a great choice for most participants. Fruits is part of a combined component with vegetables at breakfast and is required as a standalone component for lunch and supper. At snack, fruits can be served as one of the 2 required components. For all meals and snacks, the required serving size is 1/2 cup. Vegetables are very similar to fruits. Note that leafy greens have the opposite issue as dried fruits since they only credit for half their volume. This means 1 cup of leafy green salad will only credit for 1/2 cup of vegetables. Many adults prefer to have more vegetables as opposed to fruits during meals, and so the CACFP meal pattern allows for the substitution of a second vegetable component for the fruit component at lunch and supper. The second vegetable, however, cannot be the same vegetable, meaning if you serve carrots during lunch and want to serve a second vegetable, you cannot serve 2 portions of carrots. Instead, you need to serve another vegetable with the carrots, for example, peas or celery. Same as the fruit component, 100% vegetable juices may be served, but only once per day. Just like fruits, vegetables are a part of a combined fruit and vegetable component for breakfast and are required as separate components for lunch and supper. It can also be served as one of the 2 required components for snack. All serving sizes are 1/2 cup. Programs serving adults can use several meal service styles. One of the options is called Offer versus Serve, also known as OVS. Everyone enjoys having choices, and Offer versus Serve provides adult daycare participants with the option to decline some of the foods offered in a reimbursable breakfast, lunch, or supper. Offer versus Serve is not available for snacks since there are only 2 components. For more information, we have an additional training on Offer versus Serve as part of the CACFP Meal Pattern series. We also have 2 handouts on Offer versus Serve. The first, on the left, provides some basic definitions and the requirements of OVS for breakfast and lunch. The second handout, on the right, provides illustrated examples of reimbursable and non-reimbursable meals for breakfast and for lunch and supper. This can be downloaded from the CACFP Meal Pattern and Menu Planning page. When you use offer versus serve, it can get confusing for participants, especially when it's not clear what must be taken for a full meal. This can be especially tricky when you have combination foods or if you want to offer two or more items from the same component. For example, if you wanted to provide strawberries and oranges, your participants will need to know that taking the strawberries and oranges will only count as one component for lunch or supper, because both will fulfill only the fruit component. To help cut down on confusion, when you have either combination foods or two or more food items from the same component or both, you must provide some instructions or signs to help participants select a reimbursable meal. Here's a sample sign for serving combination foods at supper or lunch. The sign only needs to be put out when you have combination foods and helps your participant know how many items they need to have. It's a simple and visual way to help your participants out and make your mealtime staff's life a little easier as well. Signs can come in many different forms, but should help guide participants in choosing at least the minimum amount of components or items required for a fully reimbursable meal in offer versus serve. Moving on to our special dietary needs. Adult participants in CACFP often have different needs compared to child participants. In many cases, adult participants may be lactose intolerant or are not fond of cow's milk. In these cases, if serving yogurt in place of milk for one meal and skipping milk for supper is not sufficient, you can also substitute a nutritionally equivalent soy milk for any participant as long as they have a milk substitute form on file. The form can be signed by the participant or their legal guardian. For a list of nutritionally equivalent soy milk, check out the ODE CNP Special Dietary Needs page. Sometimes, special dietary needs can also include smaller portions or modifying textures due to medical needs. In the case of smaller portions, participants will need to have a medical statement filled out by a licensed healthcare professional, since the minimum portion requirements will not be met. For modified textures, as long as the participants are receiving the same foods and incorrect minimum portion sizes, then no additional forms will be required. In the case of supplemental drinks, if the drinks meet the requirements for a nutritionally equivalent milk alternative, then you will only need a milk substitute form to serve it in place of fluid milk. But if the supplemental drink does not meet the nutritional equivalence to fluid milk, then you will need a completed medical statement filled out by the licensed healthcare professional to serve it in place of fluid milk. More information on special dietary needs is available on our Special Dietary Needs webinar, which you can find on our YouTube page. When you serve a nutritionally equivalent milk, you can provide the milk substitute request form for the participant to complete. The participant or a healthcare professional can sign and date the form and return it to you. Remember that this form will only be applicable for select soy milk brands that are nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. The full list of nutritionally equivalent soy milk is on the ODE CNP Special Dietary Needs page. If you are not serving a nutritionally equivalent milk substitute, then you will need a licensed healthcare professional to complete a medical statement for accommodating disabilities. Let's look at this medical statement in detail. You can adjust the form to include your organization's name at the top. The section below should be filled out by your center staff. Include the name of the staff person who should receive the form and the site name. This is especially important if you have multiple sites. Next, you can fill out the name of the participant or leave it for them to fill out. This will then be provided to their state licensed healthcare professional to fill out the next few sections. In this example, Ashley's doctor will include which major bodily function is affected, in this case, her digestion and metabolism. It doesn't have to be a diagnosis and does not need to include the word disability. The doctor should also include the meal accommodation plan. These are foods to be avoided, or it can include information on texture modifications, staffing that is needed, or the tools that might be needed to accommodate the meal. Here it's stated that Ashley should get smaller portions. Next, the doctor or licensed healthcare professional should also include the foods to be substituted or the recommended alternatives. In this case, Ashley's doctor suggests half portions of all required food items. Finally, you need to make sure that there's a signature from a licensed healthcare professional along with a date. In Oregon, this can include medical doctors, doctors of osteopathy, naturopathic doctors, physician's assistants, certified nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, dentists, and optometrists. Once that's completed, your staff member will get the form back, look at the form, evaluate it, and indicate what you will serve for Ashley. Your center will serve Ashley half portions for all meal components per doctor's orders. Your staff will sign it, and the form will be valid from that day forward. The form will not need to be renewed annually and will be valid as long as the diagnosis is valid. If you can get a doctor's note that includes all the necessary information, this is all the parts that are highlighted in red boxes, that can be considered a valid written statement as well. But having a medical statement form can make it easier to tell if you have all the required information, since you can look at the form and see that it includes all the necessary elements. With older participants, having foods that are familiar can be very important for acceptance. In a multicultural society, this may mean having a variety of menus to meet various cultural needs. In general, most cultural foods can be integrated in the CACFP meal pattern to meet the requirements. One area where we get the most questions is around the whole grain rich requirements. With the meal pattern updates, whole grain rich foods must be served once a day when grains are required. For some communities, whole grain rich options are not commonly consumed products, and it may require some time to adjust. Similar options to commonly consumed items, such as white rice, white wheat tortilla, and white breads, are also available. For example, good alternatives to white rice include brown rice and wild rice. Good alternatives to white wheat tortillas include whole wheat tortillas and whole corn tortillas. For white bread, good alternatives include whole rye breads and buckwheat cereal. Another common issue we see when it comes to cultural foods is the acceptability of cow's milk. Some cultures do not drink much cow's milk after adulthood, and so another option would be to provide a nutritionally equivalent soy milk, as we discussed earlier. In some vegan or vegetarian communities, meat alternates are commonly consumed. And for these communities, tofu and alternate protein products are acceptable meat alternates that may be served in CACFP. For tofu, make sure that tofu meets the protein requirements of 5 grams of protein per 2.2 ounces of tofu. These will typically be firm or extra firm tofu. For alternate protein products, make sure you get a product formulation label from the manufacturer before you serve the item so you know how much each serving will credit. Remember that most cultural foods are appropriate for CACFP. If you have any questions regarding specific foods, contact your assigned child nutrition specialist for more detail. Today we looked at the meal pattern chart for adults and went over the meal components. We also discussed the meal service style of offer versus serve and requirements for special dietary needs. Finally, we ended our conversation with how we can accommodate cultural menus. Thank you for all you do to feed Oregon. This institution is an equal opportunity provider.